In 1977, an indigenous boy mysteriously disappeared in the Amazon forest. No trace, no clue. Until almost 3 decades later, something incredible happens. A necklace, the very one he was wearing on the day he disappeared, turns up in an antique shop thousands of miles away. What happened to this boy? And how did this necklace get there? Get ready for a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about time, fate, and the secrets of the jungle. In 1977, an indigenous boy mysteriously disappeared in the Amazon rainforest. No trace, no horses. Until almost 3 decades later, something incredible happens. A necklace, the same one he was wearing the day he disappeared, turns up in an antique shop thousands of miles away. What happened to this boy, and how did this necklace get there? Get ready for a story that will challenge everything you believe about time, fate, and the secrets the forest holds. Dawn broke gently over the Gornorf. Golden light filtered through the dense canopy of leaves and created mottled patterns on the damp forest floor. The aroma of freshly baked emul bread mingled with the earthy smell of the rainforest, a scent that Kurai had known his entire life. The 9-year-old boy woke up with the sun, as he did every day. His dark eyes opened, and for a moment he lay still in his hammock, listening to the forest awakening. The birds began their morning concert, and in the distance he heard the deep roar of a howler monkey. Today was a special day. His father, Padai, the respected shaman of the village, had promised to take him to the sacred watercourse, a place that only initiates were allowed to visit. There, Kai would begin the first stage of his training to become a future pet. With a leap, he left his hammock and grabbed the necklace that lay on a small carved wooden tray next to his sleeping place. The necklace was made of bright red seeds, carefully polished and threaded onto a cord made of plant fibers. His grandmother made it for him when he was 6 years old. "These seeds come from the sacred tree," she had explained to him. "They will protect you and show the spirits that you belong to us." Quar had never taken off the chain since then, except to sleep as his mother demanded. So that the string didn't break, he tied the chain around his neck and left the family hut. Outside, the village had already come to life. Women prepared breakfast, men checked their hunting weapons, and children played between the huts. His mother, JC, knelt in front of the fire, stirring a clay pot. When she saw her son, she smiled. "You're up early, my little warrior," she said. "Your father's at the river. He is preparing himself." Kurai nodded excitedly. "I will go to him. First there is something." She handed him a bowl of fruit and a piece of manjak bread. "The path to the sacred watercourse is long. You need your strength." As he ate you, JC watched her son with a mixture of pride and concern. He was so small for his age, but his spirit was strong. The elders had recognized in him early on the gift, the ability to communicate with the spirit world. It was an honor, but also a heavy burden. "Be careful today," she said, stroking his shiny black hair. "Listen to your father and do not stray from the path alone." "I promise," Kwa replied with his mouth full. After breakfast, he walked to the river where his father was meditating. Padakarai sat on a flat stone on the shore, his face turned toward the rising sun. His eyes were closed and his lips moved in silent prayer. Kwai stood respectfully and waited. He knew that one should not disturb a paget during its communication with the spirits. After a few minutes, Kurai opened his eyes and turned to his son. "You're ready," he stated. There was no question. Kwai nodded eagerly. "I have done everything you said, father. I didn't eat meat for 3 days and bathed in the cold river every morning." Kurai smiled slightly. His weather-beaten face was crisscrossed with deep lines. "Sign of wisdom," as the villagers said. He wore his ceremonial paint, red and black lines that ran across his chest and face, telling the story of his spiritual journeys. "The path to the sacred watercourse is not just a journey through the forest," he explained during the uprising. "It is a journey into your inner self. You will see and feel things that might frighten you. But always remember this. Fear is only a shadow cast by our ignorance." Quar tried to look brave, even though his heart was beating faster with excitement and a hint of fear. "I won't be afraid," he promised. Kurai placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "A little fear is good. She teaches us respect. Come on now, we must leave before the sun reaches its highest point." They briefly returned to the village to collect their supplies. A bag of dried fruits, 2 gourds with water and kis, medicine bags containing sacred herbs and ritual objects. JC hugged her son tightly. "Watch out for the red seeds," she whispered in his ear. "They will protect you." Kai touched his necklace and nodded. Then he and his father set off into the dense rainforest. The path they followed was barely visible, a narrow strip where the undergrowth grew less densely. To untrained eyes it would have been invisible, but Kwarai had grown up with the forest. He recognized the subtle signs, a broken branch here, a certain arrangement of stones. There, as they ventured deeper into the forest, Karai told his son stories about their ancestors and the sacred places they protected long ago. He said, "Before the white people came to our land, our shamans could wander freely through the forest. There were holy cities as far as the eye could see. But now," he sighed heavily, "now we must guard our secrets even better." Kai knew what his father was talking about. In recent years, more and more strangers have invaded their territory. Lumberjacks, gold prospectors, missionaries. They brought with them disease, violence, and foreign ideas. "Will the white men also find the sacred watercourse?" he asked worriedly. Carr shook his head. "No, this place is protected by ancient magic. Only those with pure hearts and Gorani blood can find him." They hiked for hours, the sun rising higher and the air becoming humid and oppressive. Sweat ran down Quarry's body, but he didn't complain. He wanted to prove to his father that he was strong enough to train as a pahe. Around midday, they reached a small clearing. Carr gestured for his son to sit down, and they shared some dried fruit and a drink of water. "From here on, the path becomes more difficult," warned Carr. "We have to climb a steep slope, and then walk through a part of the forest where the spirits are particularly active. Always stay close to me." Kay nodded seriously. The idea of restless spirits frightened him, but excitement overcame it. He touched his necklace again, felt the smooth red seeds beneath his fingers, and drew courage from them. After their brief rest, they continued on their way. As his father had predicted, the path became steeper and more difficult. In some places, they had to hold on to roots and vines to avoid slipping. As they reached the crest of the hill, they heard a dull rumbling in the distance. "What's that?" Kay asked, alarmed. Kari's face darkened. "Machines? The loggers are closer than I thought." He stood still for a moment, listening. "We must change our route. Following the old path is too dangerous." They turned east, away from the disturbing noise. The new path led them through a particularly dense part of the forest, where little sunlight penetrated the canopy. The air was filled with the scent of rotting vegetation and the sweet scent of exotic blossoms. "This part of the forest is old," Karai explained in a whisper. "The trees here stood before our ancestors came to this land. They hold many secrets." Kai sensed the awe in his father's voice and tried to see the forest with new eyes. The massive trunks stretching toward the sky, the intricate interweaving of life, from the smallest insects to the majestic jaguars lurking somewhere deep in the forest. Suddenly, Karai stopped and raised his hand. Karai froze. "What's wrong, father?" he whispered. "Do you see this?" Karai asked, pointing to a tree ahead. Karai narrowed his eyes. The tree was different from the others. Its trunk was a deep red, and its bark seemed to pulsate in the dim light. "This is an ibaro, a tree of life," Karai explained reverently. "The seeds for your necklace come from that tree. It's very rare to find one. This is a good sign for your initiation." They approached the tree cautiously. Carr placed his palms on the red bark and closed his eyes. Karai watched in fascination as his father communed with the tree. "It is old and wise," Karai said finally. "He has seen much." He opened his medicine pouch and took out some tobacco, which he scattered as an offering at the base of the tree. "May I touch it too?" Kai asked shyly. Carr nodded. "Place your hands on the bark and close your eyes. Listen not with your ears, but with your heart." Kai did as he was told. The bark felt warm, almost like living skin. For a moment he thought he could feel a gentle pulse, as if the tree were breathing. A feeling of deep calm flowed through him. When he opened his eyes again, his father smiled. "You have the gift," he said proudly. "You heard his voice, didn't you?" Kwai nodded, overwhelmed by the experience. "We will perform a small ceremony here before we go any further," Carr decided. "The Ibaro will bless and protect us." He began taking various items from his pouch: dried herbs, a small drum, a gourd bowl. Kuriai was to help him set up a small ceremonial area in front of the tree. Go and gather some dry twigs for a small fire, Kurai instructed, but stay within sight. Kwar nodded eagerly and began searching the area for suitable firewood. He was so focused on his task that at first he didn't notice the silence that had suddenly fallen over the forest. No bird song, no insect buzzing, just an unnatural, oppressive stillness. When he finally did, his blood froze in his veins. Something was wrong. He turned to return to his father when he heard a crack, the unmistakable sound of a twig breaking under a heavy foot. And then he saw them, three men in dirty clothes moving through the undergrowth. One carried a machete, the others rifles. They hadn't noticed Kwar yet, but were moving directly toward the place where his father was preparing the ceremony. Panic seized the boy. He had to warn his father, but if he called out, the men would discover him too. Heart pounding, he began to quietly creep back toward the Ibero. But in his haste, he stepped on a dry branch, which snapped with a loud crack. The men turned abruptly in his direction. Their eyes widened as they saw the small indigenous boys. "Hey!" one shouted in Portuguese. "What do we have here?" Correa froze in shock. His hand instinctively reached for the red seed necklace, his protection, his link to the spirits of his ancestors. In that moment, he didn't know that this would be the last day he would see his village, his father, and everything he knew and loved. He didn't know that his red seed necklace, now clutched between his trembling fingers, wouldn't reappear until 28 years later, in an antique shop. Thousands of kilometers away, a silent witness to a secret the Amazon rainforest had kept for a quarter of a century. Before we reveal the end of the story, give us a like and subscribe to our channel. We're about to reach 2,000 subscribers, and only you can be part of this success. The scream echoed through the forest, shattering the sacred silence. Carr jumped to his feet, his ritual objects falling to the ground. He would recognize this scream among thousands. It was his son. "Kwarai!" he cried, rushing in the direction the scream had come from. His heart pounded against his ribs as he fought his way through the dense undergrowth. Branches whipped his face, but he didn't feel the pain. When he reached the small clearing, all he could see were the backs of three men dragging his son. Karai struggled desperately, kicking and punching, but he had no chance against the strength of the adults. "Let go of my son!" Karai yelled, running toward the intruders. One of the men turned. His weather-beaten face twisted into an ugly grin. He raised his rifle and aimed at the charging shaman. "Stay where you are, Indian, or I'll shoot." Karai stopped abruptly, his eyes wide with horror. He saw the fear in Kui's eyes, saw the red string of seeds that had come loose during the struggle, and was now lying in the damp moss of the clearing. "What do you want?" he asked, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "He's just a kid." "Lash, we need a leader," replied the man with the rifle. "Someone who knows the ways through this damn jungle. The little one will lead us to the ancient ruins that people talk about." Kari's blood froze. The ancient ruins, sacred cities of his people, hidden deep in the jungle, protected from the greedy eyes of the white man, places where gold and valuable artifacts were supposedly to be found. "I will guide you," he offered, his voice pleading. "Let my son go. He doesn't know the ways." The man just laughed. "No, you would mislead us. Children don't lie easily." He also cast a meaningful glance at his accomplices. "Do we need insurance for your cooperation? The village will help us if we have the boy." Before Karai could react, the third man, who had been silent until now, pulled out a bottle and sprinkled a cloth on Kwai's face. The boy struggled for a moment, then his body went limp. "Kwarai!" Karai cried, rushing forward, blind with despair. The rifle barrel flashed in the sun, then a shot rang out through the forest. Carr felt a burning pain in his shoulder and staggered back. Warm blood seeped through his shirt. "That was a warning," growled the gunman. "Next time I'll aim for your head. Go back to your village and tell them if they lead us to the ruins, you'll get the boy back, if not." He left the sentence unfinished, but the threat hung heavy in the air. The three men retreated with the unconscious Kuriai, disappearing into the dense green of the forest. Carr sank to his knees, overwhelmed by pain and despair. His trembling fingers groped across the forest floor until they found the red string of seeds. He pressed her to his heart and finally let the tears he had been holding back flow. The return to the village was an ordeal. The gunshot wound bled heavily, and he blacked out several times. But the thought of Kirai drives him. He had to save his child, no matter what the cost. When he finally reached the clearing of the village, he collapsed. The last thing he heard were the horrified screams of the villagers and Ya's desperate call for her son. For 3 days, Kirai hovered between life and death. The fever sapped his strength, and in his fever dreams he repeatedly saw Quar calling for him, hands outstretched, eyes full of fear. On the 4th day, his consciousness cleared. JC sat next to his sleeping mat, her face marked by grief and sleepless nights. "The men?" he asked in a rough voice. "Quiet." JC shook his head. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Nobody came. We have sent out search parties." But she broke off, unable to continue speaking. Carr closed his eyes. He felt an icy cold grip his heart. "They won't come," he whispered. "You lied." Once he was strong enough to stand, Carr began his own quest. Despite the protests of the healers and JC's pleas to spare himself, he led a group of young warriors into the forest. They followed the kidnappers' tracks as best they could, but the rain had erased most of the clues. For days they combed the forest, calling Quares's name until their voices were hoarse. They found nothing. No trace of the men or the boy. When they finally returned to the village, Kirai was a broken man. The physical wound healed, but the wound in his soul remained open and bleeding. In his desperation, he turned to the spirit world. For 3 days and 3 nights, he fasted, drank only water, and chewed sacred leaves, which expanded his consciousness. In Tron, he searched for his son, sending his spirit over the forest, the rivers, the mountains. What he saw made him wake up with a scream. Karai tied up in a wooden hut, surrounded by darkness and fear. And then fire, flames licking up the walls of the hut, smoke filling the small room. "He's alive," Karai gasped as JC rushed to him, "but is in great danger." With renewed determination, he organized a second search. This time they took supplies for several weeks. Carr led them to the place he had seen in his vision, an abandoned logging settlement deep in the forest. When they reached the settlement, they found only charred ruins. A fire had destroyed the primitive huts, leaving only blackened beams and ashes. Searching for remains barely brought Kirai out, the words like poison on his tongue. The men carefully searched the ruins, digging through ash and charred wood. The hours stretched into an eternity as Kirai prayed like he had never prayed before, that they wouldn't find anything. His prayers were answered. There were no bones, no remains of a child in the rubble. "He might have escaped," one of the warriors said hopefully. "They took him before the fire started," another added. Carr clung to this hope like a drowning man to a floating branch. If no body was found, there was a chance that Quar was still alive. The search expanded. Carr traveled to other indigenous villages, asking about strangers with a young boy. He even ventured into the small white settlements, overcoming his fear and reluctance, driven by the desperate hope of finding his son. Months passed, then years. The intense search became a constant, subliminal vigilance. Kirai returned to his duties as a paget, but a part of him was always searching, watching, always hoping. JC changed. The cheerful, fun-loving woman became quiet and withdrawn. She often sat for hours at the edge of the village, her gaze fixed on the forest's edge, as if expecting Kwai to appear at any moment between wood appear from the trees. 5 years after her son's disappearance, she fell ill with a mysterious fever. No medicine, no healing rituals could help her. Kirai stayed by her bed day and night, holding her hand as life slowly drained from her. "Find him," were her last words. "Find our son." After Kirai's death, Kirai intensified his search once again. He traveled further than ever before, even to the large white cities, strange, noisy places that frightened and confused him. He learned better Portuguese so he could ask for his son. In Manaus, he met an anthropologist named Dr. Martins, who was touched by Kirai's story. The scientist helped him file missing person reports and establish contact with authorities, but the officials just shrugged their shoulders. An indigenous boy disappeared in the Amazon years ago. The chances of finding him were practically zero. "Perhaps he was adopted by another family," suggested Dr. Martins, "or he could have ended up in an orphanage." Karai visited orphanages in Manaus, Belém, and even Sao Paulo. He stared into hundreds of young faces, searching for Quares's eyes, for the special birthmark behind his right ear. Vain. 10 years after her disappearance, the village held a funeral ceremony for Karai. It was traditional to honor and release the souls of the deceased after this time. Carr participated, spoke the ritual words, but in his heart he refused to give up his son. He always carried the red seed necklace with him, wrapped in a piece of cloth that had once belonged to JC. Every night before going to sleep, he took them out, held them in his hands and spoke to the spirits, asked her to watch over Kuriai wherever he might be. The years passed. Carr aged, his once black hair turned gray, then white. His skin wrinkled like old leather, and his back arched. But his eyes remained watchful, and in his heart hope continued to burn, a small, unquenchable flame. 15 years after the disappearance, Dr. Martins brought a new technology to the village, a computer with internet access powered by solar cells. He showed Karai how to search for missing people, how to search images in databases. The old Panjer learned quickly, despite his initial skepticism about the strange machine. Soon he was spending hours in front of the screen, scrolling through reports of missing children, studying photos of unidentified teenagers. 20 years passed. The village had changed. Younger generations had grown up. For the Quarais, the disappearance was an old story, a legend told around the fire. A new Pag was trained, Kari's nephew, a serious young man with a talent for the ancient rituals. Carr, now in his 70s, slowly handed over his duties. But he never gave up the search for his son. He had built up a network of contacts, anthropologists, missionaries, indigenous rights activists who helped him search for clues. 25 years after the disappearance, Karai received a letter from Dr. Martins, who was now teaching at a university in Rio de Janeiro. A former logger had confessed on his deathbed to his involvement in the kidnapping of an indigenous boy in the late 1970s. Kari's hands trembled as he read the letter. Finally, a clue. The man had testified that they had taken the boy to a remote cabin to later use him as a guide to the alleged gold ruins. But during the night, a violent thunderstorm had arisen. Lightning struck the hut and started a fire. In panic, the men fled, leaving the boy behind, tied up and unconscious. "We thought he had died in the fire," the dying man had said. "But when we returned days later, his body was not among the rubble. The ropes lay there, burned through, but there was no trace of the boy." This news rekindled Kari's hope. If Kuriai had survived the fire, where had he gone? How had a 9-year-old boy survived alone and frightened in the wilderness? With Dr. Martin's help, Karai organized a new search. They returned to the burned settlement, now barely recognizable after all these years. The forest had reclaimed the ruins, trees and bushes grew where the huts had once stood. They searched the surrounding area, questioning old settlers and river dwellers. Had anyone, above all, seen a confused indigenous boy? An old fisherman remembered Waga. Yes, there had been a boy, frightened and injured, who had appeared on its banks one morning. He hadn't spoken Portuguese, only a foreign language. Murmured. The fisherman had taken him in and tended his wounds. "What happened to him?" Karai asked. His heart raced with excitement. The old man shrugged. He stayed for a few weeks. Then a trader who was heading to Manaus came by. He offered to take the boy with him, to help him find his family. I thought that would be the best thing for him. Another lead that led nowhere. The trader had long since died, and no one knew what had become of the boy he had taken to Manaus. Years had passed since that fateful day when Karai received an unexpected visitor in the village. A young woman, an anthropologist like Dr. Martins, but with a strange, excited gleam in her eyes. "My name is Ana Luisa," she introduced herself. "I'm from Porto Alegre, and I think I've found something that might be theirs." She opened her bag and took out a small object wrapped in a cloth. As she unfolded it, she held a necklace of bright red seeds in his hands. Exactly the ones Kwarai had been carrying on the day he disappeared. Kari's world began to spin. With trembling fingers, he touched the string of seeds he had thought lost forever. Where was everything he could produce? Where did they find it? "In an antique shop in Porto Alegre," Ana Luisa answered. "Thousands of kilometers from here. And that's not all. The streets of Porto Alegre were soaked with rain, and the light from the street lamps reflected in the puddles like liquid gold. Ana Luisa Ferreira, a young anthropologist with wild curly hair and bright brown eyes, hurried through the narrow streets of the historic district, a stack of books sheltered under her raincoat. She was late for her meeting with Professor Martins, her doctoral supervisor and mentor. The renowned anthropologist had asked her to retrieve some rare books on indigenous cultures of the Amazon for his new research project. As she turned a corner, her gaze fell on a small shop window, glowed in warm light, a contrast to the gray, rainy day. Artefatos do Brasil was written in ornate letters above the door, an antique shop specializing in Brazilian folk art and historical objects. Ana Luisa actually wanted to move on, but something in the window caught her attention. Between old ceramic figurines, yellowed photographs, and ornate jewelry lay something that made her heart skip a beat. A necklace made of bright red seeds, strung on a hand-spun cord. She stopped dead. This necklace, she knew such necklaces from her studies. The red seeds came from the sacred Iberahab tree, which grew only in certain regions of the Amazon. Such necklaces were made by Guarani shamans for special ceremonies and were extremely rare outside of indigenous communities. Without hesitation, she entered the shop. A small bell announced her entry, and the scent of old wood, incense, and dust immediately enveloped her. "Good day," an older man greeted her with half-bald and friendly eyes behind old-fashioned glasses. "Can I help you?" "You're soaked." "The necklace is in the window," Ana Luisa said bluntly. "The one with the red seeds. May I see it?" The man, Senor Oliveira, as she later learned, nodded and took the necklace out of the shop window. He carefully placed it on a piece of black velvet. "An extraordinary piece," or he explained. "Very rare. The seeds are from the Iberum, sacred to many Amazon tribes." "I know," said Ana Luisa, gently touching the shiny red seeds. "I'm an anthropologist. Where did you get this necklace?" Senor Oliveira scratched her chin at a dealer from Manaus. He brought a collection of indigenous artifacts about 6 months ago. He said, "I'm winding up his business and selling his inventory." "And where did he get the necklace?" "I don't know exactly. He mentioned something about an old lumberjack or gold prospector finding it decades ago." The antiques dealer made quotation marks in the air as he said the word "found" and rolled his eyes slightly. "You know how these stories often go. It was probably stolen or acquired under questionable circumstances." Anisa nodded grimly. The history of indigenous artifacts in private collections was often a story of theft and cultural exploitation. She picked up the necklace and examined it more closely. The seeds were carefully polished, the cord intricately braided, and then she noticed something, a small indentation in one of the seeds, a symbol she recognized from her studies, the sign for protection and spiritual guidance. "This necklace belonged to a child," she said quietly, more to herself than to the merchant. "How do you know that?" asked Senor Oliveira, surprised. "This mark here," it pointed to the notch. "It is only used on necklaces intended for children as a special protection. And the size fits too. It is too short for an adult." A strange feeling came over Ana Luisa. This chain had a story, an important story. She was sure of that. And suddenly she remembered something Professor Martins had mentioned in one of his seminars. The story of an indigenous boy who disappeared in the late 1970s. A Guarani boy named Kwai. "I'll take you," she decided spontaneously. "How much does it cost?" The price was high, almost a third of her monthly stipend. But Ana Luisa did not hesitate. She paid, and Senor Oliveira carefully wrapped the necklace in tissue paper and placed it in a small wooden box. "Do you have a business card for the dealer in Manaus?" she asked, putting the box in her bag. "I'd like to know more about the origin of this necklace." The antiques dealer searched in a drawer and handed her a worn card. Antonia Suarez, Artefatos Amazonicos, was written on it, along with an address in Manaus and a phone number. "Thank you," said Ana Luisa. "You've helped me a lot." By the time she left the shop, the rain had stopped and a faint ray of sunlight broke through the clouds. She hurried to her meeting with Professor Martins, clutching the small wooden box like a treasure. Professor Eduardo Martins received her in his chaotic office at the university. Books were piled on the desk and the floor. The walls were covered with maps of the Amazon region and photographs of indigenous communities. "Sorry to be late, Professor," Ana Luisa said breathlessly, "but I found something that might interest you." She told him about the necklace and its suspecting that it might have a connection to the missing Guarani he had spoken about in his lectures. Martins listened attentively, his bushy gray eyebrows furrowed. When Ana Luisa opened the wooden box and took out the necklace, he froze. "My God," he whispered, taking the necklace with trembling hands. This could actually—" He stood abruptly and walked over to one of the filing cabinets. After some rummaging, he pulled out an old folder. Inside were yellowed photographs and handwritten notes. "Here," he said, handing Ana Luisa a photo. This was taken about 6 months before his disappearance. The black and white photo showed a little boy with a serious face and alert eyes. A necklace of round pearls hung around his neck, a necklace that looked strikingly similar to the one in Ana Luisa's hands. "Quar," said Martins quietly. That was his name. He disappeared in 1977 during an outing with his father, the village Paget. They were attacked by loggers or gold prospectors. The father was shot but survived. The boy was kidnapped and never seen again. Ana Luisa stared at the photo. Her heart was beating wildly. "And they know the family. Do you have contact with you?" Martins nodded slowly. "I have known Carr, the father, for almost 30 years. I helped him look for his son. He never gave up, you know? Never. Even when everyone else said the boy was definitely dead, Karai kept searching. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He must be in his 70s now. The last few years have been hard for him. His health is failing, but his spirit is still strong. We have to tell him about the necklace," Ana Luisa said resolutely. "If this really is Quarry's necklace, then it's the first concrete sign of his son in 28 years. "Yes," Martins agreed, "but we have to be careful. We must be sure before we raise our hopes." Over the next few days, Ana Luisa and Professor Martins worked like maniacs. They contacted Antonio Suarez in Manaus, who confirmed that he had acquired the chain from a former logger named Jorge Mendes. Mendes had since passed away, but his son remembered that his father had often spoken of an incident involving an Indian boy in the late 1970s. "He never gave details," the son said on the phone, "but sometimes when he was drunk, he cried and muttered about the poor child and how he could have prevented it." Ana Luisa had the necklace's seeds examined in a laboratory. The results confirmed that they did indeed come from Ibarum, which grew mainly in Guarani territory. The seeds were estimated to be about 30 years old, fitting the time of Quarai's disappearance. Finally, they found a detail in Martin's old records that dispelled all doubts. In a 1980 interview with Quarai, the shaman had mentioned that Quarai's grandmother had carved a special mark into one of the necklace's seeds, a protective symbol in the shape of a stylized eye. Ana Luisa examined the necklace again under a magnifying glass and found exactly that mark, almost hidden in the natural grain of one of the seeds. "That's it," she said to Martin. Her voice trembled with excitement. "This is really Quarry's necklace." The professor nodded, his face a mixture of joy and concern. "Now we have to inform Karai. But how? A phone call seems inappropriate for such a message." "I'll go to him," Ana Luisa decided without hesitation. "I'll deliver the necklace to him personally." Martins looked at her in surprise. "This is a long and difficult journey. The village lies deep in the Amazon, several days' journey from the nearest town." "I'm aware of that," she replied calmly. "But this necklace took 28 years to find. It deserves to be returned with respect and dignity." A week later, Ana Luisa was sitting in a small propeller plane, flying over the endless green carpet of the Amazon rainforest. The wooden box containing the necklace rested safely in her pocket. Professor Martins had organized the trip and contacted the village to announce her arrival. After landing on a makeshift airstrip, a ride in an off-road vehicle over bumpy roads followed by a boat ride upriver lasting several hours. The heat was oppressive. The humidity made her clothes stick to her body, and the insects were relentless. But Ana Luisa barely felt the discomfort. Her mind was focused on the upcoming encounter with Karai and the significance of what she was carrying. When the boat finally docked at a simple wooden jetty, she saw a small group of people waiting on the shore. An old man stood in their midst, his white hair a stark contrast to his sun-tanned skin. Despite his age, he exuded a natural authority, and his dark eyes seemed to peer directly into her soul. Louisa knew this was Karai, the father who had been waiting for a sign from his lost son for nearly 3 decades. With shaky legs, she stepped out of the boat and approached the group. She had practiced Portuguese and a smattering of Guarani to introduce herself, but to her surprise, Karai spoke to her first, in fluent, albeit accented, Portuguese. "You bring news from my son," he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Annalisa nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the significance of the moments. "My name is Ana Luisa Ferreira. I am an anthropologist and work with Professor Martins. Eduardo told me about you," said Karai. "He said you found something." Annalisa took a deep breath and opened her bag. She took out the wooden box and opened it slowly. The red seeds glistened in the sunlight like drops of fresh blood. A collective gasp went through the group. Kari's eyes widened, and for a moment his stoic face seemed to crumble. With trembling hands, he took the chain. "Quares chain," he whispered, his voice barely audible after all these years. He stroked the seeds gently. His fingertips instinctively found the small notch, the protective mark that Curry's grandmother had made. "Where?" he finally asked. "Where did you find her?" Ana Luisa told him the story of the antique shop in Porto Alegre, of the dealer in Manaus, of the clues that led to the long, dead lumberjack. Carr listened in silence, the chain tightly in his hands, as if afraid it might disappear again if he let go. When she died, there was a long silence. Only the sounds of the forest could be heard, the chirping of insects, the calling of birds, the gentle rippling of the river. Finally, Karai spoke again, his voice now firmer. "This necklace is a sign. The spirits brought it back to us to tell us something." He looked directly at Ana Luisa, his eyes suddenly burning with intensity. "My son is alive. I always knew it in here." He placed a hand on his heart. "And now we have proof. This necklace is the first step toward finding him." Annalisa wanted to say something, perhaps warn him not to get her hopes up too much. After all, finding the necklace didn't necessarily mean that Karai was still alive, but the conviction in Carrie's voice, the unshakable certainty in his eyes, kept her silent. Instead, she asked, "What will you do now?" A faint smile crossed Carrie's face, the first she'd seen on him. "We will search for him with renewed strength, with renewed courage. This necklace is like a beacon that shows us the way." He turned to the other villagers and spoke a few words in Guarani. Excited murmurs and exclamations followed. To Ana Luisa Gewand, he explained, "Tonight we will hold a ceremony. We will welcome the chain and ask the spirits to guide us to Quar." He took her hand in his, a surprisingly gentle gesture from the otherwise reserved man. "You will participate. You brought the necklace back to us. You are now part of this story." Anisa felt something change inside her. What had begun as an academic interest, a chance find in an antique shop on a rainy day in Porto Alegre, had transformed into something much deeper. She was now connected to the fate of this boy who had disappeared so long ago, to the unshakable faith of his father, to the hope of an entire community. As she followed the old shaman into the village, the red seeds of the necklace shining in the sun, she had no idea that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take her to places she had never imagined, and to a truth as incredible as the fact that this small necklace had found its way home after 28 years. Night fell over the Guarani village like a velvet cloak. The sky was saturated, sparkling like diamonds on black velvet, far from the light pollution of the cities. A large fire blazed in the middle of the village square, its flames casting ghostly shadows on the faces of the gathered villagers. Ana Luisa sat a little way off, unsure of her role in the ceremony that was about to begin. She had exchanged her clothes for a simple white robe that the women of the village had given her. Her feet were bare, the earth beneath them warm and alive. Card retreated to his hut to prepare. When he finally appeared, Ana Luisa's breath caught. The old man had transformed. His body was painted with traditional patterns, red and black, that seemed to pulsate in the firelight. On his head he wore a crown of colorful feathers, and around his neck, Ana Luisa's heart leaped, hung Quarai's necklace of red seeds. The drums began to beat. Slow at first, then faster and faster, a heartbeat that seemed to reflect the rhythm of the forest itself. Karai began to dance, his movements fluid and powerful despite his age. He sang words in the ancient Guarani language that Ana Luisa did not understand, but whose meaning she felt in her heart. A call, an incantation, a request to the spirits. Hours passed, the ceremony swelled and flowed like a living organism. Sometimes time seemed to stand still, then again it raced forward. Ana Luisa lost all sense of reality, trapped in a state between waking and dreaming. Sometime during the night, Karai came to her, his face glistening with sweat, his eyes unnaturally bright in the firelight. "The spirits have spoken," he said in a voice that didn't seem entirely his own. "They say my son is alive, and they say you will lead us to him." Ana Luisa wanted to protest, wanted to say that she had no idea where Quar could be, that she had only found the necklace, nothing more. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she heard herself say, "I will do what I can." The next morning, she woke up with a strange feeling of clarity. The events of the night seemed like a dream, but her determination was real. She would do everything in her power to find Carfin, his son, or at least learn the truth about his fate. Over breakfast of simple fruit and thick corn porridge, they discussed their plan. Ana Luisa would return to Porto Alegre and from there follow the trail of the lumberjack George Mendez. Carr would stay in the village, but his nephew Iraz Chema, a man in his 30s who spoke fluent Portuguese and was comfortable in the white world, would accompany them. "George Menz is dead," Ana Luisa reminded, "but his son still lives in Manaus. Maybe he knows more than he let on the phone." Karai nodded. "Sometimes you need a face to look into to tell the truth." 2 days later, Ana Luisa and Irakema landed in Manaus, the largest city in the Amazon region. The heat hit them like a wall as they stepped out of the air-conditioned airport. Irakema, although accustomed to the climate, frowned. "So many people," he murmured, "so much noise." Anaisa understood his discomfort. After the silence of the forest, the hustle and bustle of the city was overwhelming. They took a taxi to a modest hotel in the center that Professor Martins had booked for them. The next morning, they set out for the address they had for Carlos Mendez, the son of the deceased lumberjack. It was a run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, the streets unpaved, the houses cobbled together from corrugated iron and wood. Carlos' house was one of the better ones, built of brick, with a small, well-kept garden in front. A man opened the door, his face marred by the sun and a hard life. "Carlos Menz?" asked Ana Luisa. The man nodded suspiciously. "Who wants to know?" Ana Luisa introduced herself and her Shema and explained the reason for her visit. At the mention of the red seed necklace, Carlos's expression changed. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said curtly. "This isn't something you discuss at the door." Inside the house, it was cool and dark. Carlos led them into a simple living room with worn furniture. Yellowed family photos hung on the walls. "So you found the necklace," he said after they sat down. "And now you want to know what my father had to do with it." "Exactly," confirmed Ana Luisa. "We know that he worked as a logger in the Guarani territory in the late 1970s, and we know that he had something to do with the disappearance of a boy named Corai." Carlos sighed deeply and rubbed his hand over his face. "My father wasn't a bad man," he finally said, "but he did things that haunted him his entire life." He stood up and went to a cupboard, from which he took out an old metal box. "After his death, I found this. I think he wanted me to find it." He opened the box and took out a yellowed notebook. "It's a kind of diary. He wrote it in his last years when he knew he was going to die. A confession, you could say." Carlos flipped through the pages until he found the passage he was looking for. "Here," he said and began to read aloud. "May 197. There were 3 of us, me, Rodrigo, and Miguel. We were looking for a particular tree the locals call ibaño. Its wood is red as blood and worth a fortune on the black market. We had heard that there were plenty of them in the Guarani area. We came across an old Indian and a boy in the forest. The old man was performing some kind of ritual. When he saw us, he tried to protect the boy. Rodrigo shot him. I thought he was dead, but later I learned that he survived. We took the boy with us. Rodrigo had the idea of using him as a hostage to force the Indians to lead us to the Ibarra rooms. We brought him to our hut and tied him up. In the scuffle, his necklace broke. I picked up the seeds. They were so red and shiny, I thought they might be valuable. That night, a terrible thunderstorm came. Lightning struck our hut and set it on fire. We fled in panic, leaving the boy behind. God forgive me, but we left him tied up. When we returned days later, the hut was nothing but ashes. We found no trace of the boy. The ropes were lying there burned out. We hoped that he had escaped. For years, I wondered what became of him. Did he survive? Did he find his village again? Or did he die alone in the forest, scared and lost? I have kept the seed necklace all these years. I couldn't throw them away. She reminded me of my guilt, of what we had done. Carlos closed the book. That's all he wrote, but he often spoke of the boy, especially when he had been drinking. He said his eyes would follow him to the grave. Ana Luisa and her Kema exchanged glances. This confirmed what they had already suspected, that Kauai had not died in the fire, but had somehow escaped. But what happened to him then? Do you know what happened to the other men? Rodrigo and Miguel? Asked Ana Luisa. Carlos shrugged. Miguel died a few years later in a boating accident. Rodrigo, he's still alive as far as I know. He has a property on the Rio Negro about 2 hours from here. A bitter old man who doesn't speak to anyone. Ana Luisa felt her heart beating faster. Can you take us to him? Carlos hesitated. He won't be happy to see us, and he certainly won't want to talk about the boy. Please, said Irakema, speaking for the first time. It's about my cousin, about the hope of my uncle, who has been waiting for a sign for 28 years. Carlos looked into Inrazema's eyes, then into Ana Luisa's. Finally, he nodded. I'll take you there, but I don't promise anything. The next morning, they drove along the Rio Negro in Carlos's aging pickup truck. The road, if you could call the bumpy path that wound through dense forest, interrupted by occasional clearings where individual houses stood. After almost 3 hours of driving, they reached a weathered iron gate. Behind it lay a dilapidated property with a simple wooden house, surrounded by neglected banana plants and mango trees. That's it, said Carlos. Rodriguez's realm. They got out and approached the house. Before they reached the porch, the door opened, and an old man appeared, a rifle loosely held in his hands. Get out of here, Carlos, he shouted in a croaky voice. And take your friends with you. We just want to talk, Rodrigo. Carlos replied calmly about the Indian boy from 1977 who froze Rodrigo. His weather-beaten face turned ashen. There is nothing to discuss. That was a long time ago. We found his necklace, said Ana Luisa, taking a step forward. The red seed necklace that broke in the struggle. The old man swayed slightly as if she had struck him. Impossible, he whispered. It's true, confirmed Carlos. You found it in an antique shop in Porto Alegre, and now you're looking for the boy. Rodrigo laughed bitterly. For the boy after all these years. He's dead. Must be dead. How do you know? Ana Luisa asked sharply. Rodrigo lowered his gaze. After a long moment of silence, he stepped aside. Come in, he said reluctantly, but keep it short. The interior of the house was Spartan but clean. Rodrigo led them into a sparse living room and gestured for them to sit down. He himself remained standing, his rifle now leaning against the wall, but within reach. What do you want to know? He asked harshly. The truth, Irakema answered simply. What happened to my cousin Kauai? Rodrigo stared at him. You are from his tribe, his family. Ira nodded. His father, Karai, is my uncle. He has been searching for his son since the day you kidnapped him. The old man closed his eyes briefly, as if enduring a sudden pain. Then he went to a cupboard, pulled out a bottle of cachaça, and took a deep drink directly from the bottle. I thought he was dead, he said finally. The fire. We fled like cowards, leaving him behind. When we came back and didn't find his body, I thought the animals had taken him. But Ana Luisa urged, sensing the sea was behind it. Rodrigo took another sip, then placed the bottle hard on the table. But then, about a year later, I saw him. The words hung in the air like an electric shock. Annalisa held her breath. Where? Irakema asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In Barcelos, a small town downriver. He worked for a flush dealer, helping with the bee and unloading the messenger. He was thin, had scars from the fire, but it was him. I'm sure of it. Did you speak to him? Ana Luisa asked. Rodrigo laughed bitterly. Spoke? What should I have said? I'm sorry we kidnapped you and left you to die. No, I ran away. I hid until his boat left. And after that? Carlos asked. Did you ever see him again? Rodrigo shook his head. Never. I often wondered what became of him, whether he remembered what had happened, whether he ever found his way home. Ana Luisa leaned forward. That flush dealer, do you remember his name? Rodrigo frowned, trying to remember. Silvera, I think. Manuel Silvera. He had a large boat, transporting goods between Manaus and the small settlements along the river. It was a thin thread, but it was more than they had ever dared to hope for. Confirmation that Quarry had survived the fire and a name that might lead them to him. They left Rodrigo's house with a sense of cautious hope. The old man stood on his porch and watched them go. A lonely, broken figure, weighed down by the weight of their guilt. Over the next few days, they tracked down Manuel Silvera. The river trader had died 10 years ago, but his son continued the business. After some searching, they found him in his office at the port of Manaus. Paulo Silva, a sturdy middle-aged man with kind eyes, listened attentively to their story. When they finished, he nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I remember an indigenous boy who worked for my father worked. That must have been around 1978 or 1979. He barely spoke Portuguese when he came to us and couldn't remember his name or where he came from. My father named him Antonio. Antonio repeated Ana Luisa. And what became of him? Paulo smiled. He stayed with us, learned the business, and became like a brother to me. When my father died, we took over the company together. Ana Luisa's heart was beating so loudly that she was sure everyone could hear it. So he's still alive. He is here in Manaus. Paulo shook his head. Not more than 5 years ago he moved to Bell. He opened his own business there, an import-export company for indigenous handicrafts. He works closely with various stems to guarantee fair prices. He stood up and went to a desk from which he took a notebook. I have his address and phone number. When he returned, he noticed the tears in her Zamer's eyes. Is everything okay? He asked worriedly. Her Chichema nodded, unable to speak. Ana Luisa placed a hand on his arm and explained to Paulo. If this Antonio is really Quar, then we have just found out that the cousin of this man, who disappeared 28 years ago and was presumed dead, is alive. Paulo stared at her, then a smile slowly spread across his face. You know, he said thoughtfully. Antonio always had this emptiness inside him, as if he was looking for something without knowing what. Maybe it was his family he was looking for. He wrote the contact details on a piece of paper and handed it to Ana Luisa. I hope you find him, and I hope he is the one you are looking for. 3 days later, Ana Luisa and her Kema stood in front of a pretty shop on a busy street in Bell. Artefactos of the Amazonia was written in ornate letters above the door. Beautiful indigenous artwork was on display in the shop window. Woven baskets, carved figures, feathered headdresses, and Anesa caught her breath. Several necklaces made of red seeds, similar to the one she had found in Porto Alegre. They entered the store. The ringing of the doorbell announced her arrival. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 40s. He had the copper-colored skin and striking features of the Guarani, but his clothes were modern, a simple white shirt and dark trousers. When he looked up and saw Irat shimmer, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Can I help you? He asked in Portuguese, his voice calm but with an underlying tension. Ana Luisa stepped forward. Are you Antonio Silvera? The man nodded slowly. That's me, and my name is Ana Luisa Ferry, and this is her subject from the Guaranorf on the upper Rio Negro. Antonio froze. His gaze was fixed on her subject, as if he were seeing a ghost. Guarani, he repeated quietly. I always felt that I had a connection to them. Iratema took a step closer. We think you're my cousin, he said bluntly. Quay, the son of Paj Karai, who disappeared in 1977. Antonio, or Quay, reached for the counter to steady himself. His face was a mask of shock and disbelief. I don't remember, he said, his voice trembling. I remember almost nothing from before the fire. The fire, repeated Ana Luisa. So you remember the fire? He nodded slowly. Flames, smoke. I couldn't breathe. My hands were tied, but the ropes were burning. I crawled out, ran into the woods, then nothing. My next memory is waking up on the riverbank with a man, Manuel Silva, leaning over me. Ana Luisa opened her bag and took out a photograph. The old picture of Kauai that Professor Martins had given her. Do you recognize yourself? Antonio took the photograph with trembling hands. He stared at it for a long time. His fingers gently stroked the yellowed paper. I don't know, he whispered. It could be me, but I don't remember. Then Annalisa took out the necklace, the red seed necklace that had led her to Porto Alegre, and finally here. And this, do you recognize it? When Antonio saw the chain, his eyes widened. His hand instinctively went to his neck, as if searching for something long lost. The red seeds, he murmured. I sometimes dream of them, of a woman who gives them to me, an older woman with kind eyes. Your grandmother, Irakima said gently. She made this necklace for you when you were 6 years old. Antonio closed his eyes and a single tear ran down his cheek. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze was clearer, more determined. I have to see him, he said. My father, if he really is my father. He's waiting for you, Ana Luisa replied. He never stopped waiting for you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and activate the notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. See you soon. M.